Okay, so hey, what's up guys? How's everyone doing? I hope everyone's doing fine. And today I wanted to bring to you a small tutorial that was inspired by something I saw on w3schools.com. It's a responsive image grid. And I'm gonna be showing you right now like a finished version of the product. It's basically an image grid that contains 4 columns, and it's a responsive image grid in the sense that whenever the screen size gets smaller, we will see less columns. So for example, now we have 4 columns and we will end up with 2 columns. And the other 2 columns have wrapped up at the end of the document here. When the screen gets even smaller, we end up with only 1 column with all the columns one on top of each other. So it wraps up. So anyway, as you can see, I made like a grid that contains Marvel characters. You can download like some pictures off of the internet of whatever you want. So anyway, let's get going with how can you code this. Okay, so first of all, I have my VS Code here. I have my browser open on the right. I'm gonna start making an index file, index.html file. So by pressing exclamation mark enter, I immediately get the doc type, HTML, head, and metadata. Okay, so first of all, my responsive image grid will be contained in a div. And I'm gonna give this div a class name of like grid container, for example. Okay, then I'm gonna preview my HTML file in the browser so we can see what we're working on. Okay, at the moment it's still empty. I usually like to put a little bit of border around the container of whatever I'm doing just to know what I'm working with. So I'll start doing that. I'll be using some internal styles. Some of you might know this already, that it's better to make a separate CSS file for the styles, but since this is a tutorial, I like to have everything in one page. So let's start styling the grid container. I'll give it a border so I can just see the container, have like some sort of visual feedback as I change it. 2 pixels solid black. Okay, so here's our div. At the top of my image grid, I want to have like a small header, or actually a big header that says like Marvel characters, because that's what I'm going to be doing. And then under that, I'm going to have like another header, this time an H2 that says responsive image grid. Okay, so now let's start actually placing the images. So I'm quickly gonna go get the images that I downloaded for this project and put them here in the same folder where I made my index.html file. Okay, so now I have like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16 images. And I'm gonna be using these in the project. So first thing I'll do is a grid that contains 4 columns, where every column is going to contain about 4 images. Since I have 16, then yeah, I'm going to be putting like 4 images for every column. So I'll start making a grid that's going to contain all the columns, as I said. So div grid, for example. And in this grid, I'm going to be placing 4 divs with the class of grid column. As you can see, this is Emmet syntax. I'm doing like a div.grid column times 4. This is an easy way of typing a bunch of HTML real fast. So now we have like the basic structure of my responsive grid. Now I'm gonna start filling every column with images. So I might fast forward here since this is gonna be boring. It's a bunch of typing that you probably are not interested in seeing. But I'm just gonna be putting like image elements. Image element with a source of first hero, for example. And the second one, Black Panther, Black Widow. So as you can see, I'm putting in every column like 4 images. Okay, last column now. Okay, so now I have 4 columns. At the moment, the structure of the whole project is like a grid container, 2 headers at the top, another div that's called grid. Inside this grid, I have like 4 columns, each column with a class of grid column. In every column, there's 4 images. And at the moment, without any styling, this is how it looks like. So we're obviously gonna have to do some styling for it to be a responsive grid like the one that I showed at the beginning. First of all, we want the grid column to only take 25% of its container. So I'll target the grid column, and we'll see how it will react. I didn't memorize the styles. The point of this is trying to like apply one style at a time to go about it in a logical way. So the grid column, I want the grid column to have a width of 25%. As you can see, images are still overflowing. Like obviously some images here are not only 25% of their container. So that is because the image will by default be displayed in its full size. So if we want an image to only take 100% of its container or only to fill its container, then we need to target the image and give it a width of 100%. That will make it so that it doesn't overflow from its container. It doesn't appear outside of its container. I'm just going to be showing you something real quick here. So our grid column is taking 25% of the screen, but the images just ignore the borders of the grid column and they overflow. So what I'm going to be doing is targeting the images inside the grid column. So grid column, image. This means target images inside of grid column and go for a width of 100% on these. Okay, so now as you can see, the images are not overflowing anymore. Every image is taking only 25% of the whole grid container. The problem now is that the images don't have our 4-column structure that we are trying to make. I'm going to show you real quick in the inspector what the grid column is. So that's a grid column, another grid column. At the moment, they're all on top of each other. What I want to do is have like these boxes that get highlighted to be next to each other so that we have 4 columns. So the grid container needs to have a display of flex. Okay, so it didn't work out the way I wanted it to work out. And that is because I targeted the wrong container. I didn't want to target the grid container because that also contains like the headers. What I wanted to do is actually target the grid, which is what contains the grid columns. So what I ended up targeting was that. So it also horizontally aligned all the headers as well, which is not what I want. So I'll target the grid this time and give it a display of flex. Okay, so now we have the 4 columns next to each other, and that is fine for now. I'm gonna rearrange the images a little bit so the columns are not so uneven. I want them to be a little bit more even to not have empty space like this. So I'm just gonna change the position of some images. So I can swap Arrow and Doctor Strange, for example. So now this is a little bit more even. So yeah, Hulk doesn't appear because I forgot the extension. Yeah, okay, so this is better. Now we don't have empty spaces. Let's start styling the grid in its default size, which is the bigger size. And then eventually let's start putting some responsive design to it. So at the moment I'll just start giving some padding and some margins to the images in order not to have them stick against each other like this. It will look better with the padding. So I'll target the grid and give it a padding left of, for example, 0.25 rem, and a padding right of 0.25 rem so that we have padding on both sides. Okay. 0.25 is a little bit too small, so I'll go for 0.5. See how that looks. Yeah, that's better. Now I want to have also some padding between every image. So in order to do that, I'm gonna add some padding to the grid columns. Same thing, it's gonna be padding left and padding right. So I'm just gonna copy and paste it. Okay. So now we have like 0.5 rem here, like around the grid. And then another 0.5 rem around each column. So this is why it looks even, because I'm getting 0.5 here and 0.5 here. And then each column is also giving me 0.5 here and 0.5 here. So this adds up to 1 rem, and this adds up to 1 rem, and 1 rem, and 1 rem, and 1 rem. So this will end up with the grid pretty much looking like it has even spacing between images and the borders. Okay, so next up I want to put some margin on top of every image, so they're still too close vertically. For example, this space to be a little bit bigger. So I'm gonna target every image and give it a margin top of 1 rem is gonna be too much. Let's try 0.5. Yeah, okay, so it looks okay. So next thing I want to do is change the font of Marvel characters and a responsive image grid. So I'm gonna quickly go to Google Fonts. So I saw like this font earlier that I liked, and it looked like the same kind of font they use in comics. So I'm gonna download that if I find it again. Yeah, that's it, Bangers. It's called Bangers. I'll use the import syntax because I just prefer that. So I'll copy and paste this at the top of my style sections. And then I'll copy and paste this in the styles of the headers. So at the moment I still don't have classes on the headers. So I'll give headers classes. I'll do like a grid header 1, and then I'll do like a grid header 2 as well. And then I'll target both of them. And apply the font family name. So as you can see, it's really easy to just get fonts from Google Font and apply them to your document. So here we go. We have changed the font of our 2 headers. I also changed the color to red, for example. And I also want to apply some text shadow. This just makes the font look a little bit cooler. It kind of looks like the headlines that you get in comic books. I always forget like how to make a text shadow, so I'll just Google it real fast, like text shadow CSS. Okay, so I'll copy and paste this. And I'll change the color as well. I'll also put some spacing between every letter, because now they're too close against each other. So I'll do like letter spacing of 4 pixels. It's a little bit too much, maybe 3 pixels. Okay, now I also want to center the headers. Okay, so now we can move on to the responsive part of the tutorial. So pretty much I want my grid container to only contain 2 columns when the screen gets smaller than 700 pixels. It should only contain 2 columns, or 650 pixels. And if it gets even smaller to, like, I don't know, smaller than 500 pixels, then it should only contain 1 column. So let's start doing that by writing some media queries. So I'll do add media screen and max width, and then type the pixel size that we want this media query to impact. So we said 650, it should have only 2 columns, so max width. And what should happen is that the grid column that we have over here takes a width of 50% instead of 25%. So 25% obviously means 1/4 of the screen. 50% means half of the screen. Okay, that didn't work out. So let's see why. Okay, so the reason it didn't work is because by default the display flex will not allow items inside the flex box to wrap. I don't want two columns to disappear from the screen. I want them to go under the other 2 columns. So instead of having 4 columns, we have 2 really tall columns. So what I need to do here is flex wrap and do wrap instead of no wrap. By default, it's no wrap. Wrapping is the correct way to go, but we created a new problem. And that new problem is that even at this at the large screen size, you won't see all 4 columns. So we want the padding to be included inside the 25% width of the grid column. At the moment, every column is only 25% of the screen plus the padding, so we don't have space for a 4th column. So another thing I want to do now is add a property to every element in my document that's called box sizing and set it to border box. This will make it so that the padding of every element is calculated in its width. So when we do this, at default size, we have 4 columns. And when we go to like a smaller size, then they wrap up and they become 2 columns. And the other 2 columns that disappeared, they didn't disappear. They actually just went under here. So now we have 2 really tall columns instead of 4 small columns. Last thing I want to do is repeat this very same process for when the screen gets even smaller, to just have 1 extremely tall column at, like, for example, at 450 pixels. So at 650 they become 2 columns, at 450, or maybe at 500, even under 500 they will just become 1 very tall column. So I'll do another media query. This time I'll give it a max width of 500 and the width is going to be 100%. So I just want 1 column to fill the whole grid when we're below 500 pixels. Okay, so this is it pretty much. So now we have 1 column when we are at or below 500 pixels. Above 500 pixels we have 2 columns, and above 650 we have 4 columns. And yeah, that's pretty much it. It's a pretty short and easy tutorial, and I hope you guys had fun following along. So that's it for now, and I'll see you later. Bye bye.